Hi, welcome once again to Senior Focus. I'm your host, Bill Adams, and Senior Focus is a show designed for adults over the age of about 50. But if you're under 50, feel free to stick around because you'll be learning quite a bit about our area's history and specifically about our food history in the area. Before we get started, I want to thank Greg Roten from Armstrong's Channel 20 and 100. He brings the show to you every week, and if you happen to miss a segment or part of it, you can always go to OnDemand or also to YouTube where the shows are posted. Also, we want to thank Keith Kaiser from Mill Creek Metro Parks. Keith runs the Davis Visitor Center here at Fellows Riverside Gardens, and he's kind enough to let us use the museum downstairs here for today's show. And come out to the parks. They're there for your benefit. Mill Creek is one of the most beautiful municipal parks in actually the entire country. So today we have Thomas Welsh. Thomas is one of two authors, including Gordon Morgan, who have written a new book. It's called Classic Restaurants of Youngstown. And it's brand new, right?
Brand new. It actually was officially released on the 15th, and some copies were available as early as the 10th, 9th and the 10th. But yeah, it's hot off the presses pretty much.
Well, and we want to thank you for coming back because last year you were here with your book on Strauss, Strauss's department store. And we were talking a little bit about that project before the show and how, this has been the last year you've been working on this.
This project actually took about 14 months, and I did want to say something before we go any further, is that this show actually played a role in assisting the research and classic restaurants of Youngstown because when we were interviewed about Strauss's, Mike and I had talked about the restaurant's book and that we were doing research, and we received calls from no less than 10 viewers of the show who wanted to share their memories and impressions of restaurants they had grown up with. And a number of them made it into the book, and those that didn't are certainly in the acknowledgments.
Well,
so
we're
very
glad
nice. That's a good indication of the show's viewership.
Well, I'm glad that helped, and who knows, maybe we'll discuss future projects. And
absolutely,
if you have other
right.
needs for research,
that's right.
We could talk about that a little later. But why don't you just talk about what the book covers? I know it's a certain time period, right?
It covers the period essentially between 1945 and the present, although it does make a little jump back into the 1930s to put things into context. But basically 1945 to the present. And it was envisioned to be, I envisioned this as a manageable project because I was going to limit it to the Youngstown city limits with a couple of exceptions. One exception being those restaurants like Kravitz's, for instance, which began life as the Elm Street Delicatessen on the north side and later moved to Liberty. Other restaurants that were right on the city limits, like the Golden Drumstick, which a lot of Southsiders remember, was just a few feet beyond just south of the Youngstown border. And what I quickly found was that the project was not so manageable. There were dozens and dozens of restaurants, and as I mentioned earlier, in the mid-1950s, on Market Street alone, between the bridge and Midlothian Boulevard, there were no less than 250 businesses operating, and about a third of those were restaurants. So it was a massive project. What we did to make it manageable was we really tried to tell the story of the community through the prism of the restaurant industry. So it reads very much like a story, and it moves more or less in chronological order and talks about the trends that affected the restaurant industry over time. And of course, there's reference to many of the specialties that people enjoyed.
Yeah, and it's interesting how when you look at the broad sweep of time from the post-war era, the growth and I guess the liveliness of the downtown area. You show pictures, I mean, just throngs of people. And then, as you go through time, maybe into the 60s, there's the suburbanization you talk about.
Absolutely.
And
the rise of chains.
Right, and then eventually, of course, in the 70s, we had the steel mill closings and some of the economic downturn and the aftermath of that, but now there's a rebirth. And so you actually get into that also. And
so the book has a nice symmetry. The narrative has a nice symmetry because you're starting off, the book opens on VJ Day in downtown.
Yeah.
When you had tens of thousands of people gathered in Central Square to mark that occasion. And it closes in the downtown in a downtown that is vibrant, a downtown that is appears to be revitalized. Mm-hmm. And that process hasn't stopped. It's continuing.
Well, again, we were talking before the show, and it's amazing how much you had to edit this to get it down because I mean it's packed with information, but yeah, really there's even more that you couldn't fit in the book.
Well, I think one of the most famous quotes in literature is William Faulkner's comment: "If you're a writer, you need to be prepared to kill your darlings." Well, this was like the Saturday night, or the St. Valentine's Day massacre of literary projects. It was when I turned in the original draft of the first 2 chapters and the introduction alone, it was 82,000 words. And they got back to me and said, "No, Tom, this whole book needs to be 38,000 words." I think the draft I turned in before we did the final edit was over 100,000 words after substantial edits. And we finally got it down to 64,000 with 78 photographs. And I think it's a very rich narrative, but some of the decisions I had to make to cut material were just heartbreaking because people had such wonderful stories about Jay's, the Golden Dawn, the MVR, the Mural Room, some of which are still around and some of which exist only in memory. And it was a wonderfully entertaining project to research, I'll say that.
Well, why don't we at this point mention that there's an event coming up, and we'll mention this again towards the end, but as part of the rollout of the book, you're working with the Mahoning Valley Historical Society? Yeah.
Right. The Mahoning Valley Historical Society and Grow Youngstown are co-sponsoring rather, a project, an event called Memorable Meals Mahoning Valley, and that's going to be on Sunday, April 27th at the Tyler History Center downtown. Many of you know that as the old Ross Radio building. And it also, of course, was the original site of the Harry Burt Confectionery, home of the Good
Ice
Humor
cream
Bar.
Yeah.
That's right. And so it's a wonderful facility for those who have been down there. It's going to be again on the 27th. It's going to be held between 1 and 5. And you're going to have dozens of restaurateurs who are going to be presenting their signature dishes. You know, the MVR with the trestle tortellini. Scarcella's is going to be serving its signature wedding soup and pasta. I believe Saratoga is going to be presenting Italian pastries. Jay's is presenting Greek pastries. It's going to be a wonderful event. And then you're going to have people representing restaurants that are lost, restaurants that have since closed, including Mark Marino, the grandson of Rocky Marino, who founded the famous doghouse chain that a lot of people fondly remember. He's going to be presenting his grandfather's signature chili dogs at the event. So it should be a wonderful celebration of local cuisine.
And why don't we get into maybe some of the folks that you interviewed? I know there is a listing of, well, probably 100 or
yeah,
more, I don't know.
Well, the acknowledgments includes, I'm sure over 100 names. And we did a series of in-depth interviews with people who were closely connected to the restaurant industry. And I was saying to Bill before we started taping, about more than a dozen of those interviews were actually transcribed, and the transcriptions, the bound transcriptions and recordings, were donated to the Mahoning Valley Historical Society. And those included, well-known local figures like the late Carmen Cassis, who graciously agreed to an interview, and this was well before his illness. Charlie Staples tells his story, and that story is transcribed. Kurt Melkoff, whose parents established the iconic 20th century restaurant, that's the only way to describe it, gave me an in-depth interview about his family and the many restaurants they operated in Youngstown, not just the 20th century, but also the Golden Drumstick, the Dixie Kitchen, the Gob Shop. They even ran an upscale New York-style restaurant where people came out with silver trays. The El Morocco, I believe it was called.
Oh.
And so Connie Kushma with Scarcella's told her family story. We weren't able to do that with every single one of the interviews, but I think people are going to feel that this they really have a sense of the era, each era that's dealt with in the book.
Mm-hmm. Now, with the downtown restaurants, what were some of the, maybe the ones that people would recognize if again, I'm thinking of the seniors out there that are maybe in their 80s now, if they were around during World War II and the end of that era?
No doubt that the Mural Room was considered perhaps the most elegant restaurant downtown, and the Mural Room was located on West Boardman Street, not far from Vindicator Square, and it had an interesting combination of elements because you had a kind of Old South theme. Mm-hmm. You know, there was a kind of a painting of a riverboat when you walked downstairs to the main dining area. But their chef was actually from Spain, and so they had these wonderful international cuisine as well. And Fred Del Arco was the pastry chef who was considered. He had worked for Strauss's, he'd worked for a number of the bakeries here in town, and his salt sticks, that was one of the specialties that people remembered. You would receive a complimentary bread basket with some of the best, pastries and bread products around, and they had my memory, sadly, I was young when the Mural Room closed, and my sole memory of the Mural Room, unfortunately, was going to the treasure box, the cardboard treasure box that sat near the organist.
Oh, they had an organist.
Right, they had an organist. They had an organist. Okay, and not far from where he was positioned, you had a little treasure box for kids, and I remember picking up a packet of Mexican jumping beans. And I think of all the things to remember, this wonderful atmosphere, all of this good food. But it was, the Mural Room was considered the Youngstown's most iconic restaurant in the 1940s. There were other places, the Palace Grill, which was connected to the Palace Theater. There were a couple of shop fronts down, which of course attracted all of the theater and film stars and entertainment figures that came to Youngstown. And Jack Benny was a regular at the Palace Grill, and according to the Bellows family, members of the Bellows family who I interviewed, he always ordered baked beans, so apparently he was trying to maintain his image. But you had restaurants like the Italian restaurant, which was actually where the Cedars ended up later.
Okay, yeah, I remember the Italian restaurant as a child, yeah.
And that had this warm, welcoming atmosphere, and apparently not only was the food excellent, but if they had a crowd and they couldn't accommodate you, they would give you the option of taking a little table in the kitchen.
Is that right?
So it was almost like being at home, or better than being at home. They really were treated people very well. You had Ding Ho's, which actually would have been south of downtown, which was the notable for its Peking chicken and other dishes. And you had the Ringside, which offered that was downtown, which offered an interesting combination of Italian American, Anglo American, and Chinese dishes. It was and a lot of people had their first exposure to Chinese food at the Ringside. So those are a few that I can think of, and then there are so many more. But
well, and you've discussed a number of different
Jays.
and cuisines. I'm thinking about how you had just like the town, we were a blend of all different European nationalities, and of course. African American folks coming up from the South. And,
absolutely, yeah.
I mean, just all these different cultures. So you talk in the book about the different types of food also and different types of restaurants.
And not only the different types of food served at different establishments, but you often had a combination of foods served in restaurants that you would never find in most communities. To find Italian food, Eastern European food, Southern cuisine on one menu.
Well, because they're trying to appeal to all the different.
Exactly, exactly. And so we have a real melting pot when it comes to our cuisine, and I think, and that's one of the things that struck me is that when I interviewed people who had since left the area, that was one of the things they missed. And I taught people who actually who were not living too far away, maybe living in Columbus or Cincinnati, who actually asked local caterers to handle big family events because they missed the wonderful food here in this area. So that was in fact the response to this book has been overwhelming, and I think that's an indication of just how passionate people are about food in this community.
Yeah, do you want to talk about just some of the response you're getting so far? I mean,
Well, I had an event over at the Briar Hill Cultural Center, which some of you may remember as that was the former St. Casimir's Church on Jefferson Street, and again, you know, brought 45 books and they were gone, and I had people wanting more. So that was my initial presentation book signing event, and I've heard from people who have talked to the folks at Barnes & Noble. They're having trouble keeping it in stock. So in terms of personal responses, I think especially people who were closely connected to restaurants have been really touched by the book, because it's a tribute to their parents and their families. But the response has been across the board.
well, again, we're talking with Thomas Welsh. He is one of the two co-authors of the book. It's brand new, Classic Restaurants of Youngstown, and it's literally hot off the press.
Yeah, it's.
I know, and it's available here. Well, let's talk about where you mentioned Barnes & Noble. I know it's here at the shop at Davis Visitor Center.
That's
some
right.
other places.
Youngstown Nation has copies, and I'm not aware right now of the full range of outlets that are carrying the book, but I do know it's at Barnes & Noble's, here at the Davis Center, and at Youngstown Nation, and it'll probably be and the Mahoney Valley Historical Society is carrying them in the gift shop. And I did want to say one quick word about my co-author, Gordon Morton. He really played a significant role in pulling this project out of the fire, because we were just rushing to meet the deadline, and he was his proactive response to research and interviewing, and he was just really made it possible for us to be here today. So I did want to give him a call out.
Well, on the back cover, actually, and I should maybe hold that up. That's part of one of the chapters where we talk about suburbanization and the franchising and things like that. You mentioned the hot dog, or the dog shop.
Well, that's one of the stories that I think a lot of people don't know. I think many people are aware of the fact that the Arby's chain was established here in the Youngstown area. The national headquarters was initially downtown. And the first Arby's restaurant was established in Boardman on 224 in 1964. But we actually played a role in a couple of different chains, and one of them that a lot of people have forgotten is the Dog House, which was in 33 states. It was in 33 states across the country. It was the brainchild of Rocky Marino, who had at various times operated Rocky's Tavern downtown, and also was an owner of Moore's Tavern for a period of time, and was known for his chili dogs. And the concept just exploded. So in 1964, they were actually giving McDonald's a run for their money in terms of growth. And so those are some of the stories that I think people don't know about the community.
Well, what about, we were talking again before the show about some of the outside of the downtown area, but the other restaurants. Well, why don't we go up Market Street, because there's very interesting history there of Cicero's was one of these. And,
oh yes, right.
And
right. The Colonial House, the Mansion,
right.
So many places. In fact, what happened in the 1950s is it was part of a national trend. You saw the growth of the city moving to quasi-suburban areas. In fact, the establishment of Palazzos, not far from the Youngstown Boardman boundary, is a clear indication of that trend. But we start seeing places that rival the Mural Room, which was considered the most luxurious restaurant in Youngstown. But certainly the Colonial House and the Mansion, were providing equally glamorous environments. And Cicero's came a little later. And that was really, that was one of the figures that came, that emerged time and time again in my discussion of, in conversations about really classy restaurants. There's a gentleman named Victor Cosa, who was a designer, designed the Club Merry-Go-Round on Salt Springs Road, where Ella Fitzgerald eventually, she had an engagement in 1947 where she married her bassist in downtown Youngstown.
Oh, I had no idea.
That's right. And Victor Cosa also did this wonderful, almost Las Vegas, interior of Cicero's. I mean, it was he was responsible for Palazzo's interior.
Okay.
So he was. But you did see the growth of the South Side that came to some extent at the expense of the downtown. And then, of course, we see that trend continuing with the development of the suburbs at the expense of other urban neighborhoods.
Well, this happened also on the north side. I mean, you had other restaurants maybe going up Belmont Avenue and
Absolutely.
Other,
in fact, according to Esther Hamilton anyway, the first person to sell pizza commercially in Youngstown would have been the owner of the Victoria Cafe, which some people remember was on Belmont for years. And of course, when we're talking about pizza, the first person to market Briar Hill Pizza, to use the term Briar Hill Pizza in a commercial setting, would have been Nick Levanti, who opened Levanti's Pizza, and later, of course, established Nicolini's on Belmont.
Oh, okay.
And everyone, of course, I think remembers the 20th Century Restaurant, which offered just an incredible range of dishes. And an interesting story about that is Fay Melkoff, who was Harry and May Melkoff were the owners. They traveled throughout the country, and they brought a lot of ideas from around the country back to Youngstown. And the spinning bowl salad itself was kind of a tweaked version of a dish that was offered at Lowry's Steakhouse in Los Angeles. The restaurant itself, I think people who went to Palm Beach and Miami Beach would have recognized it as what we now call beach deco.
Oh, is that? Okay.
It was very much like a Florida resort restaurant, so those were among the places that really made. There were others, places that were less well known, like the Moo Shop, which offered ice cream products, and then of course there was the ubiquitous Isley's everywhere.
Sure.
And Isley's is very well represented in the book, and of course they had their headquarters for a long time in the near the Spring Commons area, with now the site of the U-Haul building.
Well, and I think as the area went into decline because of maybe the steel closings and things, we've had, though, fortunately, we've had a lot of restaurants that stayed. I mean, I think of like a Kravitz, things like that.
Kravitz's, the Golden Dawn, the Boulevard, the MBR.
Right. Those maybe talk a little bit about those who have been through all of these times.
Well, they're important symbols of continuity, and in every case, you had people who were extremely resourceful and managed to turn trends to their own advantage. When we look at the case of the MBR, essentially the Smoky Hollow neighborhood disappeared, and its complete disappearance was hastened by the growth of Youngstown State University, which borders the area. I think the Cassis family saw that development as a potential benefit, because you had a neighborhood at that point that was becoming, like so many other neighborhoods throughout the city, a kind of case study of urban blight, and the university, by buying up that property and raising those homes, actually stabilized the neighborhood. And then, of course, in the case of both Joseph and Carmen, Joseph became very close to Coach Narduzzi at YSU and drew a lot of people from the athletic department. And of course, Carmen had worked at Mooney, and a lot of his colleagues came from Boardman and the South Side to the MVR. And later, he had an administrative position in the athletic department at YSU, and drew that crowd. But you're talking about people who were very connected to the community and managed to draw people into locales that might be a little beyond their comfort zone, because at that point, Smoky Hollow was not a destination for a lot of people.
Right.
And in fact, if anything, the MVR's profile has risen over the years from that of a neighborhood establishment to a local icon.
Sure.
Kravitz is another wonderful example of where the Kravitz family became aware of changes on the north side, including the expansion of the university that reduced traffic on Elm Street. And so they gained a whole new lease on life by moving to Liberty. Also, a large percentage of the Jewish community had moved from the north side to Liberty. So this really, those restaurants that have survived have really become aware of, and in many cases capitalized on trends that could have been adverse. you know.
Well, we have a few minutes to go. Maybe we could go full circle to you talk about the current day, I guess, and sort of the renewal and what's going on now.
Yeah, what's going on now is extremely exciting, especially for those who remember the downtown in its heyday. Fred Ross is one of the many people I talked to who was just thrilled by what's happening downtown. And this didn't just happen, as the book describes it. You know, there was a very calculated effort to redevelop downtown as an entertainment district, and there was funding that was secured. There were businesses that worked together in tandem to, you know, more or less we'll all throw in our lot together. You know? And I think also there was a different kind of mentality that emerged as we emerged in recent years. I think when a community like Youngstown loses its core industry, you have a very tight market. People become extremely competitive. People start to play zero-sum games, and I think people are now beginning to realize what benefits you also benefits me.
Sure.
You know, and so it's just a wonderful thing to get to go downtown, and it's not limited to the downtown. The book does also showcases neighborhood restaurants elsewhere in the city that are doing very well at this point. So one can only hope that we'll see if not a rebirth of the restaurant industry in the same kind of full-blown manner we saw after World War II, but a restaurant industry we can be very proud of.
Well, I was going to say, I've only lived in the area for about 50 years, but I see the current restaurants and things pretty much close to what it was in the 60s. I mean, that was sort of on the it wasn't at the peak, but
right.
Still there was quite a bit of action and activity downtown. And I think, from building up from what it had been just 20 years ago, right. I think it's pretty impressive.
And I had a chance to talk to people like Robert Farley, Roberto's Ristorante, and he made actually again a calculated decision not to establish a restaurant in the outlying areas, but establish a restaurant downtown. One, he indicated that the overdevelopment in the suburban areas makes it really it's a highly competitive atmosphere. And on top of that, you're starting to see more and more people who don't like the idea. They want a more traditional dining experience, which could involve a variety of entertainment. When you go to a restaurant, most suburban restaurants, you're more or less stuck there for the rest of the evening,
right?
And then you go home.
Right. Downtown,
you can go to Roberto's Ristorante. You can have a drink, at O'Donnell's if you want. Afterwards, you can enjoy music at another establishment. It's and you have a nice leisurely and increasingly and aesthetically pleasing walk through the downtown area.
Right.
So those assets are working in favor of the downtown restaurants.
Well, we have about a minute to go as we let people know again about Classic Restaurants of Youngstown. You just want to let people know about the event coming up.
Yes, and Memorable Meals Mahoning Valley is going to be a wonderful event. It's and I wish I had a list of all the restaurants that are involved, dozens of restaurants. I'm going to be doing a presentation on the book, and Teddy Pentelis is going to be providing musical entertainment. And he, of course, was a fixture at another place mentioned in the book, which was the Cedars
right.
Lounge. So,
right.
Yeah. But thanks so much for
sure.
giving me the opportunity. And again, I want to thank you for assisting the research of this book through the earlier show on.
Well, it was a nice
right.
accident.
It worked out very nicely.
Well, again, you've been watching Senior Focus, and my name is Bill Adams, your host. We thank Greg Roten from Armstrong's Channel 20 and 100 for producing the show. Again, if you missed any of it, go to OnDemand on Armstrong or check us out on YouTube. Also, both the book and Senior Focus have a Facebook page, so if you're on Facebook, check both of us out at that location. Until next time, thanks for watching.